Now,
on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 8:06, and we're all fired up, ready to go, and taking you right to 9 o'clock, where we'll hand it over to Chris Plant on the Chris Plant Show. This is O'Connor and Company, and coming up, we've got a huge critter news story for you. We're going to talk to Ian Lovejoy, who's one big victories yesterday in Northern Virginia for the Republicans. Also, we'll let you know what happened with Rashida Tlaib yesterday, a censure vote that did not go her way. That's all coming up. That's a busy morning already, Julie Gunlock.
That's right.
It's been very busy covering everything coming out of Virginia, but we do shift gears now as we're joined by one of the commissioners of the FCC, Brendan Carr. And wait a minute, sir, I don't know what you heard in advance about the Critter News segment, but I promise you it will be within FCC guidelines.
I'm definitely wanting to stick around for that one, that's for sure.
Okay. All right. But in the meantime, you remember when the Republicans had the majority on the FCC, Republican appointees, and they did away with net neutrality, and we were told it was going to make the sky fall. We were told that people would die in the streets because we didn't have net neutrality anymore. And, of course, that didn't happen. If anything, we had more choice and more options through Internet streaming and various digital outlets. Well, now the Biden administration is trying to, tell me what this is, this digital equity plan that they're putting forth, because it sounds to me like they're trying to reinvent net neutrality on steroids.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, look, you can put a through line between a number of policies that the Biden administration is putting in place, whether it is, jawboning social media companies to censor protected speech. Jim Jordan just put out a new report on that yesterday. That's frankly very disturbing, whether it's this return of net neutrality, which the FCC voted on last week, or this new plan that we're going to vote on next week. As you noted, President Biden has called on the FCC to implement a, quote, digital equity plan. And on its surface, you could say, okay, what does that really mean? But what it does is it would vest the FCC with new intrusive authorities over all Internet services and Internet infrastructure in this country, a set of authorities that, frankly, we have never had, at least not in the modern era. You'd have to go back to sort of the height of the New Deal era, sort of the Ma Bell telephone network, to come up with a analog for this regime. All services, all prices are going to be regulated by the FCC through this lens of equity. And where that goes, I don't think anybody can say.
Yeah, when Congress created the FCC, first of all, they didn't even know there would be an Internet. But secondly, they certainly never anticipated the administrative branch of government to have this kind of control that you lay out here. So can they even do this? This will be challenged, right?
Yeah, look, this goes back to 2 years ago when the infrastructure law was passed. That was a 1,000-plus page piece of legislation. Tucked in less than one page was a provision on digital equity. And you can read it as being sort of mostly aspirational, like, look, on a going forward basis, obviously Internet providers should not be discriminating on where they build out based on race and religion and things like that. Fine. There's a way to lawfully implement it. But what President Biden
They're taking that
has
as
done,
a mandate, huh? They're taking that as,
right,
I see.
Exactly. They've taken that one thing and they've sort of driven a Mack truck through it. And one thing that people need to remember is, we focus a lot on control of the White House, control of the Congress, but the administrative state, the FCC where I work, and the alphabet soup of agencies across D.C., they have been controlled entirely by Democrats for approaching 12 of the last 16 years, some of the most consequential years in terms of economic growth in this country. And the left, in their own judgment, is not happy with what they've seen, but rather than righting the ship, they're just going hard left. And so this is sort of a new progressive approach that, again, is going to vest the FCC with all sorts of authority. Just to put one point on it, it effectively is going to require Internet providers to comply with this, to collect the religion of their customers,
right,
their national origin, their ethnicity. Because of the sweep of it, they need to collect that information in some effort to try to come into compliance with this new law.
So this is really some scary stuff. It will allow this administrative state, which we have talked about on this show, the danger of the administrative state. But we've also talked about how these equity principles, which they trot out with word salad that sound so good, are then weaponized and really hurt people. This will allow the federal government to regulate every part of every part of the internet, like termination terms, customer credit, account history. How will they, give me an example of how they will use this information that they are gathering on users?
Well, I think that's part of the problem is I don't even think the FCC itself really knows where this goes from here, but people can now file complaints at the FCC and say somehow they've been discriminated against. The sweeping part of this, one of the many, is that it doesn't even limit itself to sort of what we would conceive of as intentional, cognizant discrimination. It says that if you have no intent to discriminate, but we at the FCC look back years from now and say some protected group was disparately impacted by some decision that a business made, then you're liable for millions or billions in fines. So it's a totally unchecked authority to allow us to second guess. Frankly, I think the through line here as well has a lot to do with just a rejection of free market capitalism. It is all about central planning and control. And unfortunately, I think it's a little bit like, Bernie Sanders has taken over the FCC.
We're speaking with FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, and as we're talking about this whole digital equity power grab that the Biden administration is trying to implement with the vote next week, you lay it out here. It sounds to me like a big government, strong arm solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Have they laid out what is wrong right now that they're trying to fix?
No, this is what's funny. So we had a 2-year proceeding on this. We did what's called an NOI, an initial inquiry. We did a notice of proposed rulemaking, a second inquiry. We got tons and tons of comments. And what the draft order says itself is after all of that, and after all that record, we have not found any real evidence of intentional discrimination in the broadband market, which is, why they've had to sort of shift gears and say, well, we're just not going to look at intentionality. We're going to look at, what was the effect of this regardless of intention. And frankly, if you look at broadband markets in this country right now, where it's built, where it's not, you can't simply look at an ISP and claim that they were discriminatory. The government has a huge role to play in here. We're sitting on spectrum at the FCC right now that providers could use to build out. The local and state governments give franchises to cable companies that delineate where they can build. So the idea that we can look at this heavily regulated market and, point some type of discrimination on them, it's really tough to comply. I mean, look, at the end of the day, this reads like a planning document drawn up in a faculty lounge of a Soviet studies department.
Really quickly, we know that these big businesses are all wrapped up in this DEI stuff, and you could go to any of these companies' websites and see the word equity 100 times. Have they come out against this, or are they intimidated, or have they sort of given lip service to this?
Well, I think industry was sort of hoping to cut a deal along the way, but those hopes were dashed. At the last minute, the Biden administration itself weighed in with a comment on the FCC telling us to go hard left. And so, FCC got its marching orders, and that's where we're going. So, yeah, I think industry my guess is the regulated components here are going to end up suing in court. And I think there's a really good argument that this goes far beyond the bipartisan statute that Congress passed.
But they've got the vote. It sounds like this is going to pass, do you think? Or is there something that people can do? Is there any sort of public comment time that people can actually have their voices heard before the vote?
Yeah, this is going to pass next week. The votes are there to do it. There may be some changes around the edges, which could be beneficial, I think. And so it's always important to make your voice heard. But then I think it's off to the courts from there. And I hope that at least the most extreme portions of this are clawed back.
All right. Well, thanks for alerting us to it. Brendan Carr from the FCC. How many more years do you have there on the commission?
I just got renominated actually by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate, so I'll be here for another 5-year term, which is great.
Oh, right. That's why you waited a little while before you came on the program again. You just want to keep your head down. I understand.
Now he's done. Now 5 years and that's
it. There's more truth there than you know.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Carr, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.